Hello and welcome back to Koala Moon, children's bedtime stories and meditations designed to make bedtime a dream. This is Camo the Chameleon's Carnival of Colour by Luke Prendergast. Camo the Chameleon had the most extraordinary ability, which he often thought of as his own superpower. He could change his skin to be any colour imaginable. He could be orange as a setting sun, or green as grass. He could turn his skin banana yellow, or make himself a bright gold and covered with glittering silver sparkles. But you know what his absolute favourite colour to be was? Yep, that's right, you've got it. He liked to be every colour all at once. Stripes of red, blue, pink, green and yellow covering his entire body, so that he looked like a brilliant reptilian rainbow. There was a time, not so long ago, that Camo had felt a teensy bit ashamed of his brightly coloured skin. He'd been afraid that it was all a bit too garish, a bit too loud. He thought it best not to draw too much attention to himself, and so he'd avoided letting his skin be his favourite rainbow colour. Instead, he'd chosen to be quieter, more muted tones, like greys and dark greens. But when he had dimmed his colours like that, all of Camo's friends and family had told him that he should never be ashamed to be exactly who he wanted to be. They'd gone out of their way to make him feel very safe and loved. And so now Camo walked around proudly with his rainbow skin, the skin he felt most comfortable in, the skin he called his home. In fact, his friends celebrated Camo's Technicolor superpower so much that often they would beg him to put on a dazzling show during playtime at Sleepy Forest Elementary School. Camo would stand in the middle of the playground, changing from electric blue to pale lavender, from sea green to black and white stripes, just like a zebra. His friends would stand there applauding and hooting and calling out, "How about red and green spots, Camo?" Or, "Try turning the same colour as Coco's ukulele." And when the head teacher, who was a wise old owl, flew off her perch, ringing her bell and telling everyone that it was time to return to lessons, all Camo's friends would give him a final hurrah and say they couldn't wait for his next display. But one morning, after he'd put on a particularly fabulous show and had now returned to his favourite rainbow colours, Camo noticed that his good pal Prickles the hedgehog wasn't smiling. He was frowning. It was clear to Camo that something was up. So Camo sidled up to him and said, "Hey, Prickles, is something up? Did you not like the show?" "Oh, no," Prickles said, flashing Camo a quick smile. "I loved your show. I always do. It was swell." Camo asked, "Then what's wrong?" "It's okay, Prickles. I'm your friend. You can tell me anything. Let's find a way to turn that frown upside down." "It's just," Prickles said before looking over his shoulder at where the rows of prickly spines growing down his back rippled in the breeze. Then he fell silent. "What is it?" Camo asked gently. He put his arm around Prickles' shoulder, careful not to get spiked by any of his spines. "It's just, sometimes I wish that I could be rainbow-coloured, just like you," Prickles said. "Or at least some colour more exciting than I am. My spines are just this dull, greyish brown. Nothing special about that." "That's not true, Prickles," Camo said. "There's nothing dull about you at all." Prickles said, "Well, it's certainly not special like you." Then he gave a sigh and went inside. As he watched Prickles go, a peculiar feeling took hold of Camo. It was as though a little hand had closed around his tummy. The feeling was one of realization, but not an entirely happy one. Camo had never, not for one moment, thought of Prickles' spines, which were lustrous and shiny, as dull. He had never thought of the fur that grew around his cheeks as greyish-brown. If he had to describe it, he'd call it tawny with flecks of copper and fire red. But it was clear that Prickles did think so little of himself. And what was worse, it seemed that seeing Camo's technicoloured chameleon skin only made Prickles feel worse by comparison. That left Camo feeling a little bit guilty. Maybe, he thought to himself, he should dim his colours a bit. Not for fear of being too brash and showy, but because it might make others feel bad. Camo carried this not altogether cheery thought around with him for the rest of the day, and with it, he began to notice something about all his friends that he hadn't noticed before. Just like Prickles didn't seem to appreciate the beauty of his spines, and instead wished he was different to the way he was, so his other friends didn't appreciate their own amazing qualities. For example, during art class, Camo's friend Feathers, the blackbird, tossed down her paintbrush in a huff. "Oh, I wish I were better at painting," she groaned. "I don't have any talents at all." Camo found this an odd and surprising thing for Feathers to say indeed, because she had the best singing voice of anyone he had ever met in Sleepy Forest. If you caught a note of her warbling from up in the treetops, it transported you to a world of dreams right away. She was certainly talented, and yet she didn't seem to be proud of her singing at all. Later, Camo heard Tweeger the giraffe wishing his neck wasn't so long as it was, and hunching to try to hide it. And Millicent the millipede complaining that she thought she had far too many feet. Slowly, it dawned on Camo that all his pals in Sleepy Forest were suffering from the same thing that he had once suffered from too. They were afraid to let their true colours shine. None of them were proud of their talents, of their brilliance, of the qualities that made them, that made them them. Instead, they were all wishing they were different somehow, something other from what they were. That made Camo feel sad, because he loved all his friends for who they were, and he wished that they would too. That was when he decided something had to be done about it. When school finished, and they were all released to make their way home through Sleepy Forest, Camo ran up to one of his best friends, Coco, and stopped him in the playground. "Hey, Coco," he said to the little koala. "Do you have a minute or two? I need to speak to you about something." Camo told Coco about what he'd noticed that day, about how it seemed some of the other kids at their school had forgotten to be proud of who they were. That instead, they were wishing they were someone else completely. Coco blinked at him a few times, thinking this through. Then he gave a sigh. "Now I think about it, Camo," he said, "I think you might be right. Sometimes people forget how magic they really are. So they need reminding." They need to take some time to appreciate themselves and show everyone they're proud of who they are. But what are we meant to do about it? Well, said Camo, giving his pal Coco a little smile, I have an idea about what we can do about it, and I think I could use your help to put it into action. And so, Camo told Coco about the idea he had come up with. What he wanted to do was to put on a huge parade that would start at Sleepy Forest Elementary School and then wend its way through the forest. And the parade would be full of colour, and everyone would be invited to march and celebrate themselves. If they had talents, they could perform them, and they could show off their truest colours, whatever those true colours might be. It would be a big celebration of each and every one of us, Camo concluded. And I've got a name for it too. The Carnival of Colour. The Carnival of Colour? Coco repeated the name dreamily. Then he nodded his head. I love it, Camo. What a brilliant idea. And I know just the person who can help us out with it. Miss Bushytail, who heads the cheerleading squad. She knows a thing or two about pom-poms and celebrations and putting on a show. I just bet she'll be able to help us out. Thanks, Coco, Camo said. I knew you'd be the right person to ask. The next day, at lunchtime, Camo and Coco went to speak to Miss Bushytail about their plan for the Carnival of Colour. She thought it was just a splendid idea and said that she would help them in whichever way she could. She would organise costumes and pom-poms for whoever wanted them, and would oversee the running of the parade itself. I'll stay on top of all of that boring organisational stuff, she said with a shake of her fluffy tail, and leave the exciting stuff to you two. The date was set, and over the following days, Camo and Coco spread the word about the Carnival of Colour. Everyone seemed very excited indeed, and they had lots of questions. What were they meant to wear? And what were they meant to do? Well, that's just the point, Camo told them. It's entirely up to you. You wear and do whatever makes you feel most like you. After that, there was chitter-chatter all across Sleepy Forest about what costumes people might wear or what amazing talents they might show off. Even certain creatures who weren't so sure of themselves before became excited about celebrating who they were. Twigger the giraffe, for instance, trotted up to Camo one afternoon in the playground to tell him, full of excitement, that he planned to display how he could pluck the leaves from the highest branches of the trees, thanks to his long neck. And when Feathers the blackbird was fretting that she didn't have any talent she could try out at the Carnival of Colour, Camo told her that in fact she did. She had the most beautiful singing voice in all the forest. Do I really? Feathers asked, looking at him skeptically. You certainly do, Camo told her. Everybody says so. A little smile crept onto Feathers' face when he said this. Well then, she said, I should probably choose a song and get practicing quick. And even Prickles said that he had an idea for the Carnival of Colour. though he wouldn't tell Camo what it was. "It's a secret," he said, smiling shiftily. "You'll see." Days passed in a flurry and fluster of planning. Miss Bushytail sewed dozens of sequined and glittery outfits and stitched together many multicoloured pom-poms. Camo planned the best route to take, and Coco asked the birds to deliver a message from branch to branch, letting the residents of Sleepy Forest know that they should come out to watch the parade. Until finally, the big day arrived. "How are you feeling?" Miss Bushytail asked Camo by the entrance of Sleepy Forest Elementary School as they waited for everyone to arrive for the Carnival of Colour. "A little bit nervous," Camo admitted, "but mostly excited. I just can't wait to see everyone showing off their truest, grooviest colours. I just hope that people actually turn up." Camo, of course, had nothing to worry about. First one forest creature, then two, then dozens more arrived, and they looked fabulous. They were all dressed in spangly displays of colour, sequin skirts and glittery shirts, and pom-poms of every colour you can imagine. They gathered in large, excited groups, waiting for the parade to begin. Some of them even gave early demonstrations of their favourite talents. Coco's little sister Kira did her best backflips across the playground, and Feathers, the blackbird, sang a few lines of her favourite tune. Soon enough, Miss Bushytail announced that the parade would be starting in 5 minutes, so that everyone should line up ready. Camo watched, his heart filled with pride and joy as the parade collected. He was so happy to see all his friends ready to celebrate themselves. Coco and Kira, Twiga and Feathers, even Wait a second. Where was Prickles? Camo looked around, but he couldn't see him anywhere. He started asking if anyone had seen him. Finally, he reached Coco. "Hey, Coco," he said. "Have you seen Prickles anywhere?" But Coco the koala just shook his head. "Isn't he here then?" he asked. "Wait there," Camo told him. "I have to find him before the carnival kicks off. I'll try to be quick." And with that, Camo dashed into Sleepy Forest, calling out Prickles' name. Camo searched in all the usual spots he thought he'd be. In a tree house where they liked to hang out, down at the hedgerow where Prickles lived with his family. Camo ran this way and that, but try as he might, he couldn't find Prickles. He was almost ready to give up when he heard a sniffling sound coming from a leafy bush. He peeked inside, and there he was. Prickles was hiding in the bush. "What are you doing in there?" Camo asked him. "Come out." When Prickles emerged from the bush, Camo was taken rather by surprise. Prickles wasn't his usual lustrous brown colour. Instead, his whole body was covered in splashy, multicoloured stripes of paint, clinging thickly to each of his spines. "Why, Prickles," Camo said, "you've painted yourself in all the colours of the rainbow. Was that your secret idea?" Prickles nodded. "Yes," he whispered solemnly, "it was." And yet, Camo could tell that Prickles didn't seem very happy about it. "But Prickles," he said, "what's the matter?" "Well," said Prickles, glancing uneasily from side to side, "this was my big idea, to be rainbow-coloured, just like you, Camo. And I felt pretty happy with it at first. But when I left home and began to walk towards the Carnival of Colour, a cold feeling began to steal over me, and I realised what it was. It's that in painting myself rainbow-coloured, I wasn't being, well, I wasn't being me. It was more like I was trying not to be me, and that, quite frankly, didn't feel so good. But the problem was I'd already painted myself, and I didn't know what to do. I had no way to get it off, so I just hid in this bush. And, well, that's where you found me, hiding here in the bush." Camo looked at his pal, Prickles, for a few moments, waves of many feelings washing through him. Happiness and sympathy, a little sadness, but mostly buckets and buckets of love. Then he threw his arms around Prickles, even enduring a couple of sharp spikes from his spines. "Oh, Prickles," Camo said, "that's just what the Carnival of Colour is all about. It's about being proud of being exactly who you are. I'm glad you can see that now. And don't worry, I have an idea about all this paint. Follow me." Saying no more, Camo led Prickles down through the forest, in between the broad tree trunks, until they reached the edge of the sleepy river. "Quick," Camo said, "dunk yourself." Prickles did just as Camo directed. He took a run at the sleepy river and plunged himself into the cool water. Camo watched from the bank as the paint was rinsed from Prickles' body and disappeared into the water. When Prickles clambered out of the river, he was back to normal. "How does that feel?" Camo asked him. Prickles looked back at his spines, their red-brown lengths covered in crystal droplets of water, all sparkling in the shimmering sun. "It feels," he said, "it feels just like I'm wearing my colours, my very own true colours." Camo and Prickles exchanged a big hug, then agreed that they had to get to the parade. They hurried through the forest and reached the Carnival of Colour just as Miss Bushytail blew a loud whistle, signalling that the parade had begun. "Camo, Prickles, up here!" Coco's voice rang out over the parade, and Camo and Prickles went and joined him right at the front. Coco was holding his ukulele and strumming it to his heart's content. And then, all together, they paraded through Sleepy Forest. What a spectacle of colour it was. Everywhere they went, forest creatures came to applaud and cheer them on. Coco played his ukulele. Feathers sang her song. Twiga plucked leaves from the tallest trees. Kira somersaulted up and down the parade, and all the other Sleepy Forest kids performed their great talents. Trumpets were blown, and fiddles were plucked. Dancers performed pirouettes, and the sports team threw balls high into the air and caught them. A few students even performed some magic tricks as they marched, making each other apparently disappear before making them reappear again. and up at the front, Camo the Chameleon strode proudly along with his best friend Prickles. Camo's skin shining with all the colours of the rainbow, and Prickles' spines their glorious red-brown colour, like a sunset captured and bottled. Two pearly white grins plastering their faces, chanting as they marched. It was generally agreed by all of the residents of Sleepy Forest that the Carnival of Colour was one of the most wondrous and uplifting celebrations in all of forest history. Just watching all of the students at Sleepy Forest Elementary School parading through the forest filled the other creatures with joy and self-confidence. It was important, they all agreed, to appreciate yourself, just as much as it was important to appreciate others. You can't love others before you love yourself, they joked to each other, nodding. You have to celebrate just what it is that makes you, you. And Camo the Chameleon, when he heard such comments being passed mouth to mouth and wing to wing through Sleepy Forest, just knew his plan had worked. Everywhere he looked, there were smiles on people's faces. All the foresters, he could tell, loved themselves just that bit more. And, as a consequence, he could also tell they also loved each other a bit more too. After the parade, they packed the pom-poms away in boxes, took off their costumes, and took down the arch of biodegradable balloons and banners that had marked the starting line of the Carnival of Colour. Everyone was pretty sleepy now. As they put the final boxes back in storage, yawns were breaking out, and people were stretching their tired limbs and talking about just how much they were looking forward to a delicious dinner and a warm and cosy night's sleep. Camo said thank you to Miss Bushytail for all her help and gave her a big hug. Then he met Coco and Prickles outside Sleepy Forest Elementary School, and they made their way home, arm in arm, through the darkening forest. Happiness hung in the twilight like a warm pulse, bearing the friends home. "What an awesome parade," Coco said to Camo. "You really pulled it off." "Yes," Prickles agreed. "What a carnival it was. A true Carnival of Colour." Camo the Chameleon smiled at his two friends. "Thanks, guys," he said. "But, just because the Carnival of Colour is over, it doesn't mean that you stop loving yourself or being proud of your true colours. The carnival isn't just for one day. The carnival is for life." "Oh, I know," said Prickles merrily. He looked back over his shoulder at his spines, which tonight, he thought, shone like gold. "I'm going to be proud of my true colours forever." And with that, the three friends walked home through the gentle night.